The sound of crystal glasses echoed across the ballroom. Laughter drifted between the soft notes of a piano. It was my husband's engagement party. Ryan lifted his glass. He looked around the room. Then his eyes settled on me. A faint smile crossed his face. "You're just another government worker." A few guests laughed with him. I didn't respond. I simply set my wineglass back on the table. 20 minutes later, the ballroom doors opened. A 4-star admiral walked in. No one had been expecting him. He didn't head for the stage. He didn't stop at the head table. Instead, he walked straight toward me. He stopped, came to attention, and then, he raised his hand in a perfect military salute. Without hesitation, I returned it. In that single moment, the entire ballroom rose to its feet. Everyone, except Ryan. He stayed frozen in his chair, staring at me, as if, for the very first time in his life, he realized he had absolutely no idea who the woman sitting beside him really was. After that night, people kept asking me the same question. Why? Why would a 4-star admiral salute someone like you? The truth is, I never expected it either. I was only trying to keep a promise, one I'd made many years earlier, a promise to stay silent. Ryan always believed he knew everything about me. We'd been married for years. He knew I worked for the government. He knew what time I left for work. He knew I disappeared every so often on short business trips. He knew I almost never talked about my job, and to him, that was enough. He never asked, and I never told him. Not because I wanted to keep secrets from him, but because, the day I first put on that uniform, I placed my hand on the flag and swore an oath that some things would never leave the gates of the base. Ryan never understood what that oath really meant, not until that night, the night a single military salute changed the way he looked at me forever. But to understand why that admiral stood in front of me that evening, we have to go back to the day Ryan first met me and decided I was nothing more than just another government worker. Before we go back to where this story began, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you were Ryan, what would be the very first thing going through your mind the moment that Admiral saluted me? Because your answer might completely change the way you experience the rest of this story. No one at the table mentioned the word sentinel again. Ryan was the first to change the subject. He went back to talking about his new job. Everyone else joined in, laughing and chatting as if nothing had happened. But the atmosphere had already changed. I noticed it in the smallest details. Someone forgot to raise their glass. Someone else stopped halfway through a sentence. Even David kept looking at me a little longer than usual. Dinner wrapped up about an hour later. One by one the guests headed home. David and I had just stepped onto the front porch, when an older voice called out behind us, "Commander Samantha." I turned around. Mr. Walt stood alone beneath the warm porch light. He didn't come any closer, just stood there, a few yards away. "I'm sorry about my question earlier." I gave a small shake of my head. "It's all right." He smiled, a quiet smile, touched with regret. "There are some names that should have been forgotten." He paused for a moment, "and there are others that should never be asked about." With that, he gave me a slight nod, then slowly walked toward the car waiting at the curb. No explanation, no handshake, just one cryptic sentence that somehow made everything even harder to understand. On the drive home, David barely said a word. It wasn't until we stopped at a red light that he finally spoke. "Who was he?" "He served for a very long time. He recognized you?" "Maybe." David nodded, then left it alone. I glanced over at him. "You're not curious?" He smiled. "Oh, I am. But if you can't tell me, I'm sure there's a reason." He reached over and gently took my hand. "I married you. Not your personnel file." I laughed. It was the first genuine smile I'd managed all evening. Across town, Ryan still couldn't sleep. The look on Mr. Walt's face kept replaying in his mind. He picked up his phone and searched for the Sentinel. Dozens of results appeared. A warship, a radar system, a military training unit, a video game, but nothing connected to Samantha. He tried again. Samantha Foster Navy. Nothing unusual. Samantha Foster Commander. Nothing. Samantha Foster Sentinel. Still nothing. Ryan leaned back in his chair. For the first time, he felt genuinely unsettled. Not because he couldn't find an answer, but because he'd shared dinners with the same woman for years, and was suddenly realizing he had never truly known who she was. Just then, his phone buzzed. It was a message from a friend working at Naval Command. Ryan had sent only one question. "Can you check Samantha Foster's file for me?" 3 minutes later, the reply came back. Just one line. "Ryan, if I were you, I'd delete this message." Ryan read the message again, and then one more time. "If I were you, I'd delete this message." He let out a quiet laugh. "That's a little dramatic. It was just the personnel file of a naval officer. How classified could it possibly be?" The next morning, Ryan arrived at the base earlier than usual. The first thing he did wasn't checking his email, it was calling the friend who had sent the text. The call was answered almost immediately. "You're actually serious about this?" Ryan chuckled. "I just want to know where my sister-in-law used to serve." A long sigh came through the phone. "I already tried. And I could only see her name, her rank, the date she enlisted. That's it." Ryan frowned. "What about the rest?" "Locked. Can it be opened?" "Yes, but not with my clearance." Ryan still wasn't convinced. "Maybe the system glitched." "No. If it were a glitch, it'd throw an error. This is different. It looks like the file was never meant to exist." The call ended. Ryan sat staring at his monitor. For the first time, it wasn't curiosity he felt, it was frustration. He couldn't stand the idea that there was a door standing right in front of him, and he wasn't allowed to open it. Around noon, Ryan met an old friend who worked at the Pentagon. After a few minutes of small talk, he made the same request. "I need you to look up someone's record." His friend nodded. A few moments later, he frowned at the screen. "That's strange." "What is?" "Hang on." He tried again. Then a third time. Finally, he turned the monitor toward Ryan. Only a few lines appeared. "Samantha Foster status. Active access restricted, additional authorization required. No assigned unit. No mission history. No commendations. No deployment record." It was as if 14 years of Samantha's military career had simply vanished. Ryan blinked. "That's all?" His friend nodded. "I've never seen a record like this. Can you request higher access?" The answer came immediately. "Don't." "Why not?" "Because the system logs every attempt." Ryan froze. "Logs it? Every single access request? And if the people who manage that file decide to check, they'll know exactly who tried to open it." The room fell silent. Ryan swallowed hard. For the first time, he realized he might have gone too far. That afternoon, Ryan drove home in silence. The radio was on. But he never heard a single word. Only one question kept repeating in his mind. Who is Samantha? Really? What unsettled him wasn't that the file was classified, it was realizing that all these years, he had believed he understood everyone in his family. Now, that certainty was beginning to crack. Just as he stopped at a red light, his phone buzzed. A message from David. "The Navy Heritage Gala is at the end of the month. If you're free, I'll see you there." Ryan stared at the screen for a long moment. Then slowly, he smiled. "If I can't open her file, I'll find my answers. From the people who already know who she is." 3 weeks later, the grand ballroom of the Navy Heritage Gala glowed beneath towering crystal chandeliers. A live orchestra played softly in the background. Everywhere you looked, there were perfectly pressed white dress uniforms. Rows of ribbons and medals shimmered beneath the lights. Laughter drifted through the room. Congratulations were exchanged. Crystal glasses clinked quietly. Ryan looked around with unmistakable pride. "Now this is where I belong." He adjusted his collar, smoothed the front of his dress uniform, then glanced over at David. "There are a lot of admirals here tonight. If I get lucky, I might leave with a few valuable connections." David offered nothing more than a polite smile. He didn't answer. I stood beside the refreshment table, quietly taking in the room. It wasn't my first Navy gala, but it was the first time I'd attended as nothing more than family, not as someone on assignment. That alone felt strangely peaceful. At least, that's what I thought. Then, the master of ceremonies spoke. "Please join me in welcoming Rear Admiral Richard Collins." The entire ballroom turned toward the entrance. Ryan drew a quiet breath. "That's him. I met him once. If I make a good impression tonight, it could open a lot of doors." He looked at me. "Come with me." Before I could answer, he was already making his way toward the admiral. David and I followed at a much slower pace. Rear Admiral Collins shook hands with officers gathered near the entrance. Ryan waited patiently for the right moment. As the admiral approached, Ryan stepped forward and extended his hand. "Sir, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Foster. It's an honor to finally meet you." Rear Admiral Collins accepted the handshake with a courteous smile. "The pleasure is mine." Ryan seized the opportunity. "Sir, I'd like you to meet my sister-in-law. She serves in the Navy too, mostly administrative work." The moment those words left Ryan's mouth, the admiral looked past him, and his expression changed. 1 second, then another. The polite smile disappeared, replaced by unmistakable surprise. He released Ryan's hand, walked straight toward me. "Commander Foster." He extended his hand again. "I never expected to see you here." I shook it. "Good to see you again, Admiral. It's been a long time." Silence settled over everyone standing nearby. Ryan remained exactly where he was, his hand still hanging awkwardly in midair. He hadn't even realized he never lowered it. Rear Admiral Collins smiled. "I still owe you my thanks." I gave a small shake of my head. "You don't owe me anything, sir." "Yes," he answered quietly. "There are debts that should never be left unpaid." He offered no explanation, just a respectful nod. before continuing deeper into the ballroom. No one knew what that thank you was for. But everyone had witnessed one thing. Rear Admiral Collins had interrupted his conversation with Ryan to walk directly over and greet me. Ryan stood frozen. An officer beside him spoke softly. "How long have you known Commander Foster?" It took Ryan several seconds to answer. "She's got my sister-in-law." The officer looked at me, then back at Ryan. He simply nodded. He didn't ask another question, but somehow, that silent look unsettled Ryan far more than any words could have. For the first time, he began to understand. Some reputations in the military aren't built on rank, they aren't built on titles, they're built on things that never appear in a personnel file. And for the first time, Ryan allowed himself to consider something he had never believed before. Maybe he had misjudged Samantha from the very beginning. The gala was over, but Ryan couldn't get one image out of his head. Rear Admiral Collins, walking right past him, just to shake Samantha's hand. He no longer believed it had been a coincidence. Once, maybe, twice, not a chance. The next morning, Ryan called Michael, an old friend who managed personnel systems for the Navy. "I need one last favor." Michael was quiet for a few seconds. "You still haven't let this go?" "Just one question. Samantha's file, is there any way to open it?" On the other end of the line, Ryan heard a keyboard clicking. Then, silence. Longer than ever before. Finally, Michael spoke. "Ryan, are you alone?" Ryan frowned. "Yeah, good, because I'm only going to say this once." Ryan held his breath. "I just used the highest level of access I have. And I couldn't get in." Ryan went completely still. "That's impossible." "I thought so too," Michael replied quietly. "Until 5 minutes ago." Ryan tightened his grip on the phone. "So what did you see?" "Just one screen." "What screen?" Michael read it slowly. "Access denied, restricted program. Additional authorization required. All access attempts are logged." Ryan froze. "What does that last line mean?" "It means every attempt to access that file is recorded." "Recorded by who?" Michael didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower. "Ryan, this isn't our system anymore. If you keep pushing, someone higher up may start asking questions." The silence between them grew heavy. Ryan stared out the window. For the first time, this wasn't curiosity anymore. It felt like he had wandered up to a door he was never supposed to touch. That evening, Ryan sat alone in his home office. His laptop was still open. The cursor blinked inside the search bar. He started to type, then stopped. Michael's warning echoed in his mind. Every access attempt is logged. Slowly, Ryan closed the laptop, not because he'd found the answer, but because, for the first time in his entire career, he had come face to face with a door his own authority couldn't unlock. Just then, a phone buzzed. A message appeared in the family group chat. "Ryan, engagement party this weekend. Hope everyone can make it." A few seconds later, another message. "I think I'm finally going to ask Sam a question." I read the text, then quietly locked my phone. David glanced over. "What do you think he's going to do?" I let out a slow breath. The same thing people do when they're more interested in proving themselves right than finding the truth. And what's that? They ask their questions. In the one place where everyone is watching. I looked out into the darkness beyond the window. A feeling settled deep inside me. Ryan wasn't searching for the truth anymore. He wanted to prove he had been right all along, and that would lead him to the biggest mistake of his life. If you've ever watched someone become more determined, the less they could find the answers, take a second to like this video, because in the next chapter, Ryan will turn his own engagement party into a public interrogation, and this time, he's about to lose control of everything. The engagement party was held at the officers' club on base. Warm golden light filled the ballroom. A piano played softly from the far end of the room. Crystal glasses clinked together between rounds of congratulations. Everything looked exactly the way an unforgettable evening should. At least, that's what Ryan had planned. For more than an hour, he played the perfect host, moving from table to table, sharing a toast with every guest, introducing his fiancée, telling a few light-hearted stories from the unit. Every now and then, his eyes found me. The mocking look I'd seen weeks before was gone. Now it was the look of a man who had spent far too many weeks chasing a single question. Just as dessert was served, Ryan tapped his spoon against his glass. The clear ringing tone slowly quieted the room. "Thank you everyone for celebrating with us tonight." Applause rippled across the ballroom. Ryan smiled. "But before we continue, I have one short story to share." He turned toward our table. "It's about my sister-in-law." A few guests chuckled. They assumed it was nothing more than a family story. Ryan walked over to the projection screen. A photograph appeared. It was me, wearing my Navy uniform. Then another slide. My publicly available service record. Only a handful of lines. Name, rank, date of enlistment. Nothing else. Ryan turned back to the room. I've spent weeks trying to learn more. And this is everything I could find. Whispers immediately spread across the ballroom. Why is it so empty? Is the database broken? Ryan shrugged. That's what I thought too. Until I asked several people to check, and every one of them got the exact same result. He paused, letting curiosity sweep through the room. Only then did he look directly at me. Sam, I only want to ask you once. Would you tell everyone why your record is classified? Every eye in the room turned toward me. David quietly set down his glass. He never looked at Ryan, only at me, as if to say, whatever you choose, I'm with you. I slowly rose to my feet. No rush, no hesitation, no anger. I'm sorry, I can't answer that. Ryan nodded, almost as though he'd expected it. Fair enough. Then let me ask something else. At least tell us what unit you served with. I can't. What was your job? I can't answer that either. He paused. Then, is there anything you can tell us? Silence settled over the ballroom. I looked at Ryan, then answered quietly. Yes. The room seemed to stop breathing. I took an oath. And that oath doesn't come with an expiration date. No one spoke. Ryan smiled, the smile of someone convinced he had just gained the upper hand. He turned back toward the guests. I respect that, but if no one can verify it, how are we supposed to know what's true and what's only a story? For the first time that evening, a few heads nodded. A woman near the stage whispered softly, "He has a point." Ryan didn't say another word. He didn't have to. He was letting the room do exactly what he wanted. Not reach a conclusion himself, but plant enough doubt that everyone else would do it for him. And then, the ballroom doors opened. A ceremonial duty officer walked in at a brisk pace. He didn't look around the room. He went straight to the event coordinator, handed over a sealed envelope. The coordinator opened it, read only a few lines. His expression changed instantly. He turned to the master of ceremonies and gave a quiet nod. The MC stood, lifted the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, may we have your attention for just a moment? We've just received notice that an official guest will be stopping by during an authorized visit to the base." Confused murmurs spread through the ballroom. Ryan frowned. This wasn't part of his plan, not even close. And for the first time all evening, he had the unmistakable feeling that the story had just slipped completely out of his hands. An uneasy silence settled over the ballroom. The music had stopped. Every conversation faded away. Every pair of eyes turned toward the main entrance. Ryan stood beside the stage. The microphone was still in his hand. For the first time that evening, he had no idea what was about to happen. Less than a minute later, the doors opened. 3 officers entered first. Behind them walked a 4-star admiral in full dress uniform. The atmosphere changed instantly. The officers seated near the entrance rose to their feet almost instinctively. No one gave an order. No one had to. His rank spoke for itself. The master of ceremonies hurried over. "Sir, it's an honor to have you here." The admiral smiled politely. "I'm on base for official business today. I heard there was an engagement celebration for one of our young officers. I only wanted to stop by for a few minutes and offer my congratulations." The event coordinator handed him a small bouquet. He accepted it graciously, then turned to Ryan and shook his hand. "Congratulations, son." Ryan looked almost speechless. Thank you, sir. We're honored you came." The admiral simply nodded, then continued walking through the ballroom. He moved at an unhurried pace, shaking hands with retired veterans, greeting a few senior officers. The room slowly relaxed. Ryan finally let out a quiet breath. Maybe that was all this was. Just an unexpected visit. But as the admiral passed our table, he suddenly stopped. His eyes met mine. It wasn't the look of a man trying to remember a face. It was the look of someone who knew exactly who he was looking at. "Commander Foster." I stood immediately. "Sir." For one brief moment, he didn't offer his hand. He didn't smile. He didn't exchange small talk. Instead, he took one measured step backward, came to attention, and rendered a full military salute. The entire ballroom froze. Without hesitation, I returned it. Our hands lowered together. Neither of us spoke, and somehow, that silence said more than words ever could. Everyone in the room understood. This wasn't courtesy. This was respect. A colonel at the next table stood at attention, then a lieutenant colonel, then another officer. Within seconds, more than half the ballroom was on its feet. No command had been given. No ceremony had been announced. It was simply the instinctive response of people who understood what that salute meant. The admiral looked at me. His voice was calm. "I don't have the authority to tell anyone what Commander Foster has done, and I never will." He paused, then looked slowly around the room. "But there is one thing I can tell you. There are men and women in uniform who spend an entire career protecting people they'll never meet, and in return, they accept that their names may never be known." He turned toward Ryan. There was no anger in his eyes, only quiet certainty. "A few moments ago, You asked how people are supposed to recognize the truth. The answer is actually very simple. In the military, some records are classified, but honor never requires declassification. Ryan lowered his head. He couldn't bring himself to meet anyone's eyes. The admiral stepped closer. He rested a hand gently on Ryan's shoulder. You weren't wrong for asking questions, but some answers require trust, more than curiosity. He smiled, offered the happy couple one final congratulations, then quietly walked toward the exit. The doors closed behind him. Softly, a heartbeat later, someone began to applaud, then another, and another, until the entire ballroom was filled with applause. It wasn't for the admiral, and it wasn't for me. It was for something far greater than either of us, for the men and women who quietly fulfilled their duty and never asked the world to know their names. The applause lasted for what felt like forever. Then, little by little, it faded into silence. No one mentioned the slides Ryan had put on the screen. No one cared about the classified personnel file anymore. Every eye in the ballroom was on me, but this time, there was no curiosity. Only respect. Ryan stepped down from the stage. Each step felt heavier than the last. He stopped in front of me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he lowered his head. For the first time since I'd known him, he apologized. I'm sorry. His voice was barely above a whisper. Not because I didn't know who you were, but because I always believed a person's worth depended on whether everyone else could see what they'd accomplished. He let out a quiet, self-conscious laugh. Tonight, I finally understand. There are people whose value is so great. They can never talk about what they've done. I looked at Ryan. There was no anger, no sense of victory, only a quiet answer. What matters isn't what you believed before, it's how you choose to treat people from this day forward. Ryan nodded. It was the only answer he needed. On the walk back to the parking lot, David reached over and took my hand. He smiled. I have a feeling the whole family is going to call you tomorrow. Probably. So, are you finally going to tell them? I laughed. No. Why not? Because it isn't only my story. David looked at me for a moment, then smiled to himself. Right. The oath. I nodded. The oath. Some missions to end years before anyone realizes they ever happened. But the responsibility to remain silent never really ends. A week later, Ryan stopped by our house. He didn't bring a bottle of wine. He didn't bring any more questions, only a box of pastries that his fiancée had baked herself. He spent the afternoon drinking tea with David, talking about work, talking about family, talking about ordinary life. Not once did he mention the Navy Heritage Gala. Not once did he mention the nether question. As he was leaving, he paused at the front door, turned back. Thank you, I smiled. I didn't do anything. Ryan smiled too. That's exactly why. I learned so much. It was the last time we ever talked about that night. And somehow, it was the best conversation we ever had. Years later, I still run into a few people who were there that evening. No one asks what missions I served on. No one tries to dig into my record anymore. They simply shake my hand, smile, and move on to ordinary conversations. Family, children, life. I like it that way. Because in the end, I was finally treated like an ordinary person. Not because everyone discovered who I was, but because they came to understand something far more important. Some people spend their entire lives protecting a country, yet the only thing they truly hope for is to come home, to live quietly, to be with the people they love, just like everyone else. If this story reminded you that respect isn't earned by what we say about ourselves, but by the way we choose to live, I'd love to have you subscribe and join me for the next story. And before you go, I want to leave you with one question. If you were Ryan, after everything that happened that night, would you have had the courage to admit you were wrong, in front of your entire family? Share your thoughts in the comments, because your answer might help someone else replace judgment with a little more respect.